All right. Should be. Let me just change this here. Window. All right. I'm trying to figure this out, Float.
No problem. So say we all.
Gallery. No. That's not what I wanted. Oh, incoming video. We'll just ride with it. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, cool. Hello and welcome to One More Word Pod presented by GSI, Gotta Say It Sports Radio. I am Marvin Williams, and I'm joined as always by the greatest producer in the known and unknown universe, Mr. Matthew Aloysius Octavius Ornthar Gerard Ryan, the third, the fifth, the half, and the seventh.
Aw, that's nice. That's a very big lie, but I appreciate it. And this is the first time in forever that you and I are actually looking at each other, and it's the first video edition of of One More Word, and it's the first video show we've done since the old Hive Mind days.
Oh my goodness, that's right. Good times. Good times. And the greatest thing about video is, well, nobody can tell you smell. So there you go. Speaking of smell, we're going to talk about something that we kind of jacked up a little bit. We're going to GSI fact check ourselves here with a coach that beyond deserves mentioning in the list of coaches that we would get to run your franchise. We're going to talk about how social media changes and has changed the locker room culture, because now we get a chance to see the things that, or hear the things that before you had no idea what's going on was being said. And we're going to talk about the list on someone who might have earned some redemption.
Oh, really?
Yeah, this person might actually, we're going to let our fans decide, or they might actually make it off the list.
All right. Well, the times are changing,
Hey, forgiveness. I am the Dolly Buddha. So
if a guy who can kill a football league can be president, anything can happen.
Well, there you go. So again, we thank you all for listening to us. You can find us on all of your favorite places, from Spotify, YouTube, iHeartRadio, Twitter, Facebook, Tinder. No,
yes.
Not Tinder.
No. We are unhinged though. Serious relationships only. We are going to be a quadruple, which is 4 different thruples all in one commune. We're going to brew coffee and have very deep conversations about 30-something.
And handmade cheese doodles, because that's fun.
I can go for a handmade cheese doodle right now.
Absolutely. And we thank you all for taking your time to listen to us this week on this Memorial Day edition, video first time edition of the One More Word Pod. So a couple of weeks ago, last week, eventually, at some point in the near past, we talked about
last edition.
There you go. Meanwhile, we talked about coaches who you get to run your franchise, coaches that you would trust to lead your unit, as it were. And one name was left out, and Matthew pulled it, as he always does, as great producers and a great sportsman always does. I get a text, and it just says 2 words. Don Coryell. I'm like, oh, so true. And I mean, like, as soon as I read it, I literally jumped out of bed, ran into the office, and started looking up some stuff about that guy, which I don't know why I did that, because
you could have done it on your phone.
Exactly. You could, but I'm old, and old habits die hard. I know they still got to die, but they die hard. And one of the things that I remember most about Coryell, outside the fact that it was probably one of the first cases for me of a coach that every single player under his watch loved that dude. you know, yeah, cats love working for Tom Landry, for Don Shula, blah blah blah. But there was always a story where a line was crossed, and the player would kind of share with you once they got comfortable with you to say, yeah, there was this one time where Coach Shula did this to me or said this to me or whatever. And so there's always that moment, right? I've never heard, outside of maybe Marv Levy, I've never heard anything from any player, including players he's cut multiple times, that said anything bad about Coryell. I mean, they always say the same thing. He treated you like a man. He let you handle your business. He called you down when he had to. He let you do your thing. As long as you're responsible, as long as you did your homework, we're good.
And it's interesting for the Charger franchise, when you look at that team's history, it's very much maligned. It's very much considered the third or fourth level franchise. You think of the Norv Turner years, or you think of the Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers years, LaDainian Tomlinson, but you look at Don Coryell, and even if you go further back, you look at Sid Gillman, the offensive advances done by the Chargers franchise, just by those two coaches, having those level of player on their those caliber of coaches on their team, and then having great players like Dan Fouts and Kellen Winslow. And then you go back, Sid Gillman, a brilliant offensive mind, but you look at the San Diego defense. That defense is one of the things that drew them into AFL championships and just
always
destroying teams.
Always overlooked the defense. And it's interesting because Coryell was a defensive player. If I remember correctly, when GSI fact checkers here, he was a defensive back at the University of Washington. I think he's always a West Coast guy. So being a defensive player, and apparently a very good defensive player, unless I'm confusing him with Larry Coryell, the guitar player from a jazz band back in the early 70s. Here's a guy, defensive player, but becomes an offensive mind. And
he was a defensive back. He was a defensive back for the University of Washington from 49 to 51, and then coached as an assistant, and then moved on, and did not get his first starting coaching job in the NFL until 1973.
Wow, talk about paying your dues. And you mentioned this, again, credit to you. You talked about these coaches who have this long, long list of paying your dues, assistants here, assistants there, assistants here, whatever, coordinator maybe, before they finally get a chance to step up into the front of the coaching room, so to speak. And, the new rule that they're trying to implement, that if a team hires a minority coach, they'll get so many draft picks in the third round. If they hire a minority front office person like a GM, they'll get so many more draft picks. If they hire them both together, they can move up to 16 spots in the third round. I'll say it because I gotta. As much as I think that rule is probably reactionary to something, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but whenever you try to re-tip the scales that much, you're inviting things. And here's what I mean when I say that. I'm sure a lot of our listeners know the Rooney Rule. Every team has to hire at least one. I'm sure has to interview. Thank you. Interview at least one minority person for a head coaching job. And what they used to do is they would basically call whoever the defensive line coach or whatever coach, give them a walk down the hall and say, okay, you're going to be our Rooney Rule interview. And a lot of guys did, even though they knew they were being used, like Mike Singletary. He said all the time, I knew I was being used, but I didn't care. It was a chance, which eventually led to him getting a head coaching job, as well as a few other guys who basically lowered the veil a little bit and let us inside and said, look, I knew they were calling me. I was the Rooney Rule person in this team or whatever for years. I knew I would be that person because I was right down the hall. They didn't have to fly me in. They didn't have to put me in a hotel. They didn't need this. They just bring me in, sit down, we'll do the interview. Well, every system can be abused. Every system can be used. We get that. But with the Pittsburgh Steelers, when Bill Cowher left, had interviewed Wisenhunt, and the word was it was his job. It was his job. He's the one who totally just totally blew up the interview room. They liked him. He had a history with the franchise, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then someone said, "Oh, you know what? We haven't interviewed a minority candidate yet." And that's how Mike Tomlin got the interview. And went in and he floored everybody. Got a second interview, floored everybody. Eventually get the job. And it made some hard bones in between Whisenhunt and don't worry, we're going to get back to Don Coryell in a minute.
But that does manifest because Whisenhunt and the Steelers end up facing each other in the Super Bowl.
Exactly. And it's a situation where that's where the Rooney Rule worked for a franchise. Now, granted, again, we try to take the outliers and totally kick them out of our conversations because for certain franchises, the rules don't apply. The Steelers are just a very strong, very solid, very, very together organization. They rarely make bad moves. They rarely hang on to trash. They rarely, every year they're what they are. And, even when Bill Cowher or Mike Tomlin went through their sequence of 7 and 9 years, no, there is no hot seat. Get it together. And they were rewarded.
And it's a weird thing because you look at the modern NFL and you look at those great franchises that sit upon the hill of being the teams that survived the Alaska Eskimo traveling team era or the Acme Packers era. You look at those original 8 or so teams that were there pre-merger. And you see that their philosophies, for the most part, have shifted with modern NFL philosophies.
Right.
But not all of those teams have retained the same ownership. You look at Chicago, it's still in the McCaskey family. You look at the Steelers, it's still in the Rooney family. And in the Giants, it's primarily split between the Maras and the Tisches. But when you look at Chicago and you look at the Giants, there is more of that hot seat. There is more of that push button. And it could be because Chicago and New York are such huge sports markets.
Right.
And Pittsburgh has had the Penguins that kind of look at everybody, look, this is a really good thing. Avoid all the problems with the Steelers. And then there's the Pirates who kind of take out the bottom of it. But when you look at the Steelers, there's always been that level of consistency. When you look at the past, 40 years, there's been Chuck Noll, there's been the Bill Cowher, and now just Mike Tomlin. Only three coaches since the 1970s, early 70s, late 60s.
Yeah, amazing. And you see the fandom in that town. You see how they're probably, I think it was some poll done a few years ago, the Cowboys and the Steelers have the broadest, the most geographically diverse fan base of all the NFL franchises. And I was really surprised to hear the Jets are up there in the top 5, which
I can see that. New York media market, you look at the Cowboys and the Steelers, and there's obviously a reason why they're in the top 2.
Right.
When you look at the 1970s, you look at the post-expansion boom of the National Football League. What were the 3 franchises that stood out the most in the 1970s when the NFL became America's game? It's the Cowboys, it's the Raiders, it's the Steelers.
That's true. And of course the Raiders were also another team in the top 5. So you see, we see this sort of attempt at a social shift to change the social dynamic. Now, I heard a person say, and I wish I can give them credit, and I didn't write it down. So I'm not going to take their credit. I want to give them credit. And when I go back and figure out who it is, I'm going to say so. But they talked about how until we see ownership change, you really won't see a culture change. And I kind of agree with that. Until you see some legitimate people legitimate minorities with money and business sense being allowed to own a franchise and to sort of infuse that culture into it, you're not going to see a real culture change on the coaching sense. But kind of saying all that, and we talked about, it's so funny, you and I talked about the whole idea of McVay or these Shanahan, these other people kind of came up and they may or may not have played football at one point or whatever. And all of a sudden now they're, head coaches or coordinators or GMs or whatnot or whatever. But how Don Coryell, I didn't even think he coached high school for a while.
He coached high school, then he primarily coached in college
Right.
at Wenatchee Valley College, Fort Ord, worked the 2 seasons at Whittier, was a USC assistant for a season, and then worked at San Diego State as their head coach from 1961 to 1972.
You cannot say that that guy was born and bred football.
Yeah.
Because we know this. There was no money being made by anyone who was not a head coach, or even in some cases, some head coaches during that time. So this guy was all the way 100% a football lifer. He finally gets rewarded. And what does he do in the process of being rewarded? He changes the entire face and dynamic of the league. And oh, by the way, what's forgotten, everything that this cat's done with Air Coryell, with Dan Fouts, and the reshifting of the West Coast offense as attributed to Bill Walsh, who kind of didn't like the term and the whole nine.
The term.
Oh, he took completely. So you have this cat who, in the middle of everything, was the first coach to win 100 games in college and 100 games in the pros. We'll
never see anything like that again.
Exactly. And it's fun. It's like, you never say never, because you never know what might happen. But think about now more than ever how the longevity needed to win 100 games in any league. Again, we'll take Belichick out of it. We talked about the coaches who won over 100 games and how some of them it took 30 years or 20 years. And how, with the case of like Marv Levy or Dan Reeves, they did it in 11. They did it in 12, which means they had no year where they won less than 10 games. Kind of like how Mark Richt was at the University of Georgia before they finally showed him. He never lost. He never won fewer than 10 games, but he never won a championship either. So you got to go. So they got.
And when you look at the changes in the National Football League too, a lot of this from the college culture has ported over into the NFL.
Yes.
Because when you look at college coaches, for a long time, it was they are there for life. They build this legacy. They are there until the end, the Bear Bryants and what have you. Now in college basketball and college football, it's a rototiller. You are there for a certain amount of time, and then you are out. In the NFL, there are not a lot of coaches who build up roots anymore. And that's just more indicative of just the pressure of the NFL, the parity in the NFL, and also the incentive to move on. You build up this franchise, and then you move on to greener pastures. And you got to wonder how much of that is the challenge, how much of that is the paycheck, or how much of that is you're tired of dealing with ownership.
And we talked about ownership, right? We talked about how a coach that's on the list is a meddlesome coach. The one we talked about, Jura, only gets one R in Dallas, right? How you have to be a special kind of coach or person to deal with that, because at some point, and now with his coach now is Mike McCarthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mike McCarthy's going to say, man, listen, at some point I can see he might look mild-mannered or whatnot, but I can just see him going, no, this is how it's going to work. This is how it's going to go.
And in a previous life, Mike McCarthy would be at the Green Bay Packers, a team that really ran through what feels like dozens of coaches between Lombardi and Mike Holmgren.
Right. And so, but why is he not there? Because there's a quarterback there that probably was tired of him. And the irony of this, and again, so kind of to bring it back to Don Coryell, can you imagine Coryell having a quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, right? All the talent, all the skill sets, everything that he looking for in a quarterback, but will come with that sort of selfish, all about me, my turn, my thing. It wouldn't work.
Do you really think Rodgers is that kind of player?
Well,
because I really haven't seen any reasoning for that. He's been very much for the team. Now, he's not Tom Brady in the level of taking all those hits, but he is someone who has had to deal with unique circumstances. He's a handsome man, and ladies love him. And also he was dealing with some unique family drama that, you and I can associate with because, as brothers, we have family, and family are, family.
I know you're stuck with him no matter what. But okay, so here's what I would say from what I've heard in front of the microphone and behind the microphone. Go back to when he was first drafted, and we all know that the drama that Brett Favre brought to the table, just in general, was still one of the worst signings I think the Jets could have did, because he no way he wanted to ever play with the Jets, but he took the contract just so he can get to Minnesota, because he just wanted to stick his finger in the eye of Green Bay. So, but from the time that Aaron Rodgers was drafted, there was sort of this thing of, you got to earn your spot, rookie, sort of attitude. And Aaron didn't appreciate that. He didn't like sort of being told, okay, no, now you got to do your thing, to earn a spot to be in the room, because he thought he was good enough. And he was, and he is, I should say. So, but with that, there's the animosity that built up that seemed to have come into his mindset, his relationship with Brett Favre. Now, apparently it's mended now. Apparently, time heals all wounds kind of a thing, and he realized what was going on. But I just thought it was interesting for the comments that you see he made back when he started becoming more public about being disgruntled about, I'm ready to take the reins, that guy just needs to leave. I think is actually one of his lines, to when the Packers draft someone to take his spot, he's having a conniption about it.
Well, he wanted to be a Packer for the rest of his career. He wanted to have that legacy. And there are not many players like that in the NFL now who are like, I will stay here because I want to build a legacy. And he wants to define himself. He's already maybe the second or third. He's definitely in the top 3 of greatest Packer quarterbacks of all time.
True that.
It's him, Bart Starr, and Brett Favre.
Absolutely. And he had won a Super Bowl. All those things that he's sort of done, he's done, and he's earned. And oh, by the way, he is must watch TV. You got to see this guy when he plays, because you just never know when he's going to make one of those throws, make one of those plays. He reminds me of a Ben Roethlisberger with a more with he reminds me of a Roethlisberger with touch. He'll run around, he can shake off a tackle, he can be elusive, but he can still make a throw that's darn near impossible. And but seeing him sort of take this dynamic and understanding that he wants to, and saying he wants to be there for the rest of his career. I get that. I think every player who gets to a franchise, who's able to do what they're able to do, yes, 100%. That's what we all want, right? But the reality of it is, it would be wrong for the franchise to say, okay, Matthew, you're our fly half on our rugby team, right? You're the guy. You're going to make this happen. You're the most important player on our rugby team. You're the fly half. But at some point, we have to get your replacement in there, because guess what? One day you won't be able to hook the pass the way you do. You won't be able to move the loop the way you do.
But when you do it after that comment comes out, like less than a week or just about within that time frame, and you're doing it during a time where you were seconds away from making it all the way, and you have that roster, and he's coming off an injury-riddled season, and he's looking to prove and define himself, and you do it in the first round with a quarterback that wasn't even that highly scouted or that highly rated. Jordan Love, no offense to him, good for him, make your money, never deny a paycheck.
Jake Fromm would have been a better pick for them from Georgia. Would have been a better pick to sort of come in there and let him groom. 100%, I agree.
But you see all those circumstances, and you look at the structure of the Packers. There is a certain level of self-destruction. There is a certain level of, there's a new coach in there. So with that new coach, you want to bring in your guys, and that's emblematic of anything, any profession. Any business, new management comes in, they're going to want to bring in their people. But imagine the rancor. And also, Brett Favre, like we just talked about it, this exact same thing happened. with a quarterback in Aaron Rodgers that was much higher scouted, higher
Yep.
touted,
Yep.
replacing a certified legend who was taking his team to the NFC Championship game.
Almost on a regular basis.
You look at these two parallel lines, and the Packers make this same move twice. The first time made sense because Favre was beat up, Favre was injury ridden, and he looked like he didn't want to be there anymore.
Exactly, and right, because and to your point, exactly right. And please continue. Remember, Brett Favre was going through his "I may or may not retire this year."
Yeah,
Remember, they got old.
You were waiting for the white smoke to come out of Lambeau Field, wondering if there was a new pope.
Exactly.
And obviously, the true pope is Mike Francesa. Praise his name.
Well,
but you look at these organizations, and it's easy for us sitting in our homes during the never-ending offseason and say we would do it this way, we would do it that way.
Right.
I would like an NFL team or a CFL team or any team to hire Marvin and I as consultants. Let us run a team. Let us run a team for the week. Even a minor league baseball team. We'll do it. You know, like 15 people that might give us like a CBA team.
There you go.
I've been a sports executive for some reason. You've been a sports executive. Why not? Even on the podcast, we might break down how we would run our own team.
Oh, that'd be
great. The process behind it.
Episode. We got it. We got to. You know, and just like with any team, and it's you build from the middle out. Mm-hmm. So for me, if I was going to start with that offensive line, the defensive line, we always start there, because if you got that, you've got forever. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, bringing it back to Coryell again, before to kind of put a bow on it, and how franchises sort of decide who does what. He was not afraid to bring in talent. He was not afraid to bring in whomever he needed to get the job done. But the advent of the quicker, more fit, more agile offensive line to handle those passes, to have a more vertical game, that again, Don Coryell. And again, that was a great save by you to bring him up and to say, yeah, that's the guy we forgot. But I couldn't see Coryell dealing with what they're dealing with the Packers, because one, he wouldn't allow that to survive in his culture. I could see, talking about ownership, right? So Coryell today, I think Coryell would work today because he would have the kind of offense that would be interesting, the kind of offense that would get people's attention. And, I'll say it, Bruce Arians will always find a job. Andy Reid will always find a job. Offensive teams, offensive-minded leaders will always find a job, because they not only put together an interesting and successful offensive, lineup on that side of the ball, but they also make it so you want to see what's going to happen next. Who's my favorite team?
The New York Jetropolitans.
I can honestly say I have rarely lived in a moment where I felt offensively comfortable enough to say, man, I'm going to see what they're going to do now. Mm. It was always a hold your breath, hold your seat, wait and see what's going to happen. Maybe we'll get a first down. Yay, we got a first down. Celebrate. High five. Do you ever, okay, speak frankly. Again, our listeners will ask you, if you're a fan of the Patriots, if you're a fan of any team that had Peyton Manning or even Aaron Rodgers or whomever, or Patrick Mahomes, not just the quarterback, but the offense in general, aren't you more surprised when they don't score?
Yeah.
And then when they go 3 and out, it's like, oh my gosh, let's call in a doctor.
But that's an interesting thing in terms of labels, because when you think of a specific franchise, you think of a specific athlete, or you think of a specific style. When you talk about the New York Jets, you think about defense, because Defense was what built them in the 80s. It's what almost got them to the Super Bowl twice in back-to-back years. And then you think of Joe Namath. But there's a 5-decade stretch between Joe Namath and where we are now. And you really can't think of great offense. You think of Keyshawn, you think of Vinny Testaverde, but those are outliers in a grander scheme of a team that drafted more Kyle Brady's than Joe Namath's.
There you go. And you know what? To your point, think about it. The New York Jets had the first 4,000-yard passer in Joe Namath when they only played 14 games. I mean, that number alone, everything else I flush out the window. Thinking of the fact that Joe Namath, who called almost all the time, called his own plays because they worked out their game plan, and he called his own plays. He called his own substitutions. He did this and threw for 4,000 yards when pass defense looked like aggravated assault. You know, when a wide receiver would get 2 yards off the line, half his helmet was missing, his wallet was gone, his credit was already stolen, he's probably got one shoe left on his.
When Jack Tatum played in the league.
Oh my goodness.
Fred the Hammer Williamson was in the AFL.
I really, really, really wish we could take the time, and for those surviving players there's so few of them left, that we could go and interview those cats to really hear their stories about what was it like to go around the corner as a, and all of a sudden you see coming to block you with somebody like, I don't know, Otis Sistrunk.
I do believe we have a good relationship with Christine Clark, who wrote a litany of autobiography, was the co-writer of many memoirs that are sitting on my shelf in the unofficial One More Word offices. So I can probably do a reach out and shoot her a text and see what we can do. Because she works with Mike Ditka's Gridiron Charity, which helps, older players, those who've given and sacrificed to ensure that we enjoyed our Sundays. When you look at that time period and you see how defense was played and you look at it now and you go back to the idea of defining identities, that identity still exists for the Steelers, even though when you think about their defense, it's Troy Polamalu now more than anything, but they fit those boxes. As a New York Giants fan, great Giants teams always subsisted on great defense, somewhat okay quarterbacks, and a run game that will knock your socks off, and a tight end that will just eat a family.
Yeah, it lost in the talk of these great transitional tight ends, Jeremy Shockey. Thank you, Jeremy Shockey. He was Gronkowski before there was Gronkowski.
And if he didn't get hurt, there's it's a lot of great what ifs for Jeremy Shockey, and a guy that could have been, and for all intents and purposes, was the next era of Mark Bavaro. He was that evolution that took us from the traditional tight end to the Kellen Winslow, Mark Bavaro era into this weird middle period where we saw Dallas Clark. We saw from Atlanta.
Tony Gonzalez.
Gonzalez as well. Brent Brooking, I believe. No. He was a linebacker. Keith Brooking, yes.
Yes.
And you look at the mid-2000s, that was that next stage in evolution. And now, Rob Gronkowski, you look at all these different players at tight end and then also at running back. The evolution of football to where now anybody who's considered an eligible player is a threat.
Right.
And it's hard. It makes it harder for defenses to block, and that's one of the reasons why I think hitting's gotten taken out of the game so much. Those hard hits, because linebackers now need to be more nimble. They need to be able to play zone and man coverage, and there's less implication, at least just from my point of view, on the blitz.
Right, and all of these are, in my opinion, all of these are natural evolutions from what Don Coryell did as a football mind, changing the way the offensive side of the ball worked. The defenses had to adapt in order to be successful. Yeah, I think all those changes on both sides of the ball. the Bruce Arians and the Andy Reeds and all the defensive minds that follow with all these various things with, well, no, we got to be faster. We have to be this, we have to be that. Absolutely right. And only if Don Coryell had Twitter.
Yeah,
And
so this is one of the things we were talking about in the pre-show meeting. You more than I, because I peaked as an athlete as a replacement player on a JV baseball team for a South Brooklyn high school in the early 2000s. You actually were paid at varying points, whether collegiate or pro.
We're using the term paid very, very, very loosely.
Goods and services were exchanged for either cash or other goods. You were an Oregon Trail athlete.
the the idea now, right? I mean, think about it. Anyone can sit up there and they can look at these cats on the field, and people don't realize how much sacrifice goes in to be in those positions, like as you put it, to not only not peak out early in our lives, but to continue to play at the highest point of the game year after year after year after year after year, right? So there's a culture that comes with that. You know what it's like to be on a team. I know what it's like to be on a team. There are things that you say and do in a locker room that people outside the locker room will never understand, will never get. There are things you do, no matter what the culture is, there are things that are done and are said inside those hallowed places, the locker room, the gym, whatever, practice, that will never fly in other parts of the world. We've all had that boss who was like a Michael Jordan, right? And, when people watching The Last Dance, which I've not watched a single frame of yet, Matthew's talked me into it, so I'm going to do it. but organizations have had bosses like a Michael Jordan. But in the corporate world, a boss like him gets sent to HR, not on an NBA franchise, right? So there are certain things that are said, whether in a military unit, on a sport, that it just can't cross the line. But we're seeing that now with social media. We're seeing how when someone says something, it hurt my feelings. There's video of it now. There's something now. The public is being led into now. They're hearing the messages that Richie Incognito leaving for Martin. When he's saying all those nasty things about, and by the way, they were boys for forever. That was a thing between them. But once it went public, it's like, oh my God, that guy's so ugly. He's so nasty. He's so this. And unfortunately, Martin was going through a personal issue of his own, and that sort of made it look even worse. Yeah. Incognito was being so insensitive. So Incognito gets his reputation for being this bully.
He didn't do himself any favors, and also I remember reading a report. I think Richie Incognito got into a fight at a funeral last year. That was an actual thing. I didn't make that up in my head. Richie Incognito got into a fight at a funeral. I've wanted to get into a fight at a funeral. I've almost gotten into a fight at a funeral, but I did not. It was a wake, but there was a long story. People were crying.
You haven't lived till you fight at a funeral or spit out a Whataburger drive-through without your food. But now, right? So now with Twitter and social media and all these other things that are going on, the idea of a player can talk about another player within the confines of the locker room, and that player might get traded to another team, or another player might go to another team, and they might tell the people on that team, guess what this guy said about me, or whatever, whatever. And now all of a sudden it's a problem, but it's between the two teams, or it might not be a problem at all. But now it gets out in Twitter. Now we start using phrases like bullying and all these other things, all these other cultural terms, and we're really seeing that with how players are now discussing how they should be treated. Another player might get you saying, Matthew, you know what, I might want to go play, during this global shutdown, but I'm afraid I might catch the virus, right?
Mm.
Because it's my life. We're talking specifically now. We're talking about Schnell, pitcher, who talked about who let it be known to his fans, and rightfully so, and he should have. Look, you know what? I'm going to make less money. I'm playing for more than just the love of the game. I'm playing for a paycheck too, because I know my career is limited, whatever his reason might have been, no matter how logical it might have sounded, right? But it became such a bad look that people said, I can't believe this guy. He said he won't go play for $3 million, but for $7 million, he'll go and he'll risk getting sick and getting a virus. Okay.
Well,
You know,
that's
why?
good for him. Like when you look at the current MLB situation, they're currently negotiating on coming back,
Hmm.
and it's all over the amount of income that will be lost by teams.
Right.
I saw a report this past week, I believe it was from ESPN or Pro Football Talk, where the NFL will lose $5.5 billion
Right.
this season if there are no fans in the stands. And the NFL could probably take a 5.5 billion hit. MLB, who knows? But with the money they're making off of RSNs, the money they're making off of various other deals, the money for baseball and the money for all sports is in television. But for the teams that own stadiums, who own the parking lots, who own the concessions, the money is in the concessions.
Right.
That's why beers at a ball game are $24, and I'm stupid enough to pay them because I'm a Met fan and I need some way to get through the damn game. But for Snell and many other players like him who are negotiating right now how much money they're going to lose
Right.
because if I'm wrong, Marvin, their deal isn't predicated on stadium revenue. It's predicated on overall revenue, primarily TV deals.
Right. Yes.
That's the CBA for baseball. And that deal is very unique in comparison to the NFL's, to the NHL's, and to the NBA's because it's an overall revenue split between the players.
It's because they
and
never want a salary cap.
Yeah.
They always said we never want a salary cap. We never want anything close to salary cap. So that was the trade-off.
Yeah. And for baseball players in the short run, that's great because it's created this level of economic stability for a sport that is not necessarily economically stable because the volume of talented athletes in this country are going towards basketball, going towards football, and less towards baseball. And you can see a downward trend, and you're seeing a higher rate from Japan, from Asia, from South Korea, from the Caribbean.
America.
Some South America too.
Again, please don't lose your thought. In the days when I was trying to make a team, the one thing that really woke me up was looking up on a bus and seeing that it was myself and maybe two other American-born players, and everyone else was from somewhere else. No one spoke English, and I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing? Before I understood how leagues own teams in those other places. Mm-hmm. And how they're grooming them from the age of 7, 8, and 9 to become major league players because they own their rights so early. So anyway, to your point, you're absolutely right. The influx of baseball is coming from everyone else, which why I said him making that statement, turning off the fans, people are still sore about the last strike. And that was in what?
94.
94. People are still sore about that. So kind of dangerous. Please go back to your thought.
And that goes to the reverence of baseball because baseball is still held in this lofty position in this country. Mm-hmm. It's held in the same way as the Constitution. There is a never-ending argument about the rules and the identity of baseball in the same way as the Constitution. Is it a living, breathing document / game, or is it something that's readily defined, that is ingrained in the fabric of America and must stay as so? I have been for years, especially on any GSI platform, been calling for the death of the American and National League, blow it up, make it seem more regional, because not only will there be more parity in an Eastern and a Western, or at least breaking it up to a North, East, South, and West divisions, and then allowing it, and my middle linebacker agreeing with me.
That's right.
it's just interesting to me how baseball will always be looked at through that lens, while other sports, especially basketball and football, because sadly in America, hockey matters as much as fact
Curling.
checking, yeah, or curling. And you look at it and you're like,
I
Olive,
love.
my dog Olive, making some very, very
You
right
tell them,
points
Olive.
here.
You tell them, Olive. You get it right. All on the play. It's a run. It's a run. She's sitting there doing this, going, "It's this screen, 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 screen."
uh, but they're not allowed to have that level of evolution that basketball and football have. And it
Right.
all comes from the salary cap. The first league that implemented free agency is still lagging behind in all the other ways that players can make their leagues more sustained. Because, yeah, Alex Rodriguez can make $300 million on a contract, but that killed the franchise.
Yes.
It forced the Texas Rangers to be sold.
Yes.
And you look at the way the Dodgers were constructed and how Frank McCourt during his divorce had to. You look at the Mets as a franchise, and it creates this huge imbalance that, like, you look at the Boston Red Sox, your favorite baseball club, how they're willing to spend hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars for probably one of what's closer to a dynasty now than ever before.
Yes.
But they will fall so hard
Yeah.
in the interim. They'll let a
So,
Terry Francona go and bring in a Bobby Valentine and completely kill their culture.
oh, that's a gut punch. Yeah. Uh, during the 100-year celebration of Fenway Park, the day they brought back the 2004 World Series team, all I remember is they never introduced Bobby Valentine. He never got. I mean, and the manager of the Red Sox. No, they no one said his name. I don't even know if he was really there. Unless he had on glasses with the mustache. I don't know. But it was just such a surreal thing. And I remember walking around the park, and at the time I had dreads, so a lot of people looking up, thinking, "Is this Manny Ramirez?" I'm like, first of all, I'm nearly a foot taller than him, but whatever. And he actually has muscles, and I do not. But it was one of those, and this woman just jumps out of nowhere from like the concession stand, and she starts laying into me about how she didn't appreciate the way I acted when I was a Red Sox, and she just went on and on and on. But she said, "I did like the fact that you helped us get a championship," and I said, all I can say was, "Thank you." Thinking to myself, she's going to tell this story forever, and I don't want to ruin her moment that she cursed out Manny Ramirez and he didn't punch her in the face. So, but that you would bring that up, is it that, and we welcome any input from our listeners, please reach out, and our viewers, we so appreciate you checking us out and watching us. It means a lot. Is it that baseball is trying to live in two worlds? Is it they're trying to live in this ancient tradition, and I'm using the word ancient even though I know it's a few hundred years old, but this the same tradition of farm ownership, and in the current corporate environment where things are rotated on a 15-minute social media cycle, and you can't have both. Like I mean, as you said it, I can go out, I can take my franchise, I can shell out way too much money for a season for an opportunity to bring home a ring. But I bring home a ring, and guess what I have to do the next year? I have to break up the team, get rid of those contracts, and pull a Florida Marlins.
Mm-hmm.
Where yeah, we got the trophy, but now no one on the team. The following years, we call ourselves the world champion, and it was Jim Leland, I believe, that actually said he told them to stop calling them the world champion Florida Marlins, because he said no one is here from that team except me. I just said that's such Jim Leland. He's like, dude, really, dude, And
Imagine if any NFL franchise tried to attempt the idea of farm teams in a farm league. Imagine if the Branch Rickey system in the 1930s and 40s that was implemented by the St. Louis Cardinals. Yes, we're going that far back into history because that's what we do on this show. When the Branch Rickey system, if George Halas or Wellington Mara's father, Tim Mara, implemented that system in football, or if that system was implemented in basketball prior to the advent of the G League.
Right.
how different would pro football look if something like that existed? Because we did have, the Pottstown Firebirds, and we had these developmental leagues that were kind of adjacent to some NFL franchises. But with the exception of NFL Europe, which, no one
Yeah.
really cared about,
Yeah.
we've never had a definitive farm system for pro football. And we've
Well,
seen the AAF flail out and try to do that. The XFL,
hmm
which didn't flail out, which was a victim of the never-ending offseason, kind of port themselves as something akin to that. But I don't think it would work now, primarily due to the economics behind it. But if that Branch Rickey style system was developed in the 40s and the 50s, do you think it would have been successful? And second to that, would it have killed the AFL?
it's so interesting you say that. It's with football, man. It's such a hard go because the one thing football has in a certain level that maybe is only comparable slightly is the NBA. Is they have college football, and there are people who will follow their college team and won't follow a pro team. I mean, won't watch a pro team at all because they have they live that, and now they're able to live that college franchise year round. Especially with the advent of social media, like what we're talking about, right? So, what we see now is, and especially with the rule of any player in college has their whatever it is 3 years after high school graduation, no matter what. So if you have any kind of football talent, you still have to wait till 3 years after your senior group graduates from high school. But the reality is what? I still have to play somewhere and be seen because rare is that talent that can be so highly recruited out of high school, disappear for 3 years and come back and get drafted to where they're going to make any money, right?
Yeah.
Whereas with the NBA, I can go do they basically do a half a year of school because I don't have to be eligible. I only have to be eligible for the fall semester. After that, I can stop going to classes. It won't matter because I'm already eligible for that year. I've done what I'm supposed to do. We go to the Final Four. We can get a championship or not. I'm still going to get drafted as a lottery pick. I'm going to make my millions. And I'm good to go, right? So that sort of that system to me is kind of hurt the NBA and the amount of talent that comes into it now because you're getting all these cats who are leaving after 1 year and then disappearing in the league because it's still a man's league.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the NFL, with the college system, cats coming out, 3 years of college, and even if they only have one good year, Joe Burrow, the number one draft pick, he wasn't spoken of in any high regard before, before this past season. So he goes from being this guy who was a more seasoned code word for older college player to become a number one draft pick because of the year that he had. He developed, and boom, now he became the number one draft pick.
And also hanging around allowed him to surpass Tua Tagovailoa, who, if he doesn't get injured, we're having a different conversation.
You think so?
I feel like Burrow still would have went first because of the story in Cincinnati wanting a player that more fits in with their system.
Right.
I don't think Tua would have gone to Cincinnati or Detroit. I don't think that was going to happen whatsoever. That was a big fam from their family straight out.
Right.
I think Miami was where he was going to go no matter what. But
right.
I think the way Miami would have got to him or another franchise would have been very different. And also, if he has that extra year of healthy play, he might have burned out. We might not have seen LSU in the national championship game. You always have to look at the different variables, and it's going to be interesting to see how both of those players level up. Because you are right, it is a man's game, and they're there's not many a great quarterback class that you see everybody make it.
And see, I think too, with size will always be held against him. Forget the potential for being injury prone, right? The whole idea, well, he gets hurt, he gets this, he gets that, whatever. Okay, fine. But I think his size, which it amazes me that size is still spoken of. When you see what people like Drew Brees, like Russell Wilson, Patrick Mahomes, you see what these non-traditional size quarterbacks are able to do. And yes, I get it. They're the exception to the rule, but we're getting to the point now where there's so many exceptions to the rule.
It's a code word for a non-traditional quarterback. It's a code word for not a non-pocket passer. The shorter quarterbacks tend to be more explosive, tend to play outside of the pocket, tend to play a more quote-unquote West Coast offense.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll get that tag associated with them because this generation of pro football analysts has not aged out. Like, right. These are the people that were still covering the game when Randall Cunningham, all 6'6" of him, and you're looking at him as like, I don't know if he can, I don't know. And then the quarterbacks in my life have been Phil Simms and Eli Manning, who are as numb as statues, as Warren Zevon put. And they still were able to collect 2 Super Bowl rings, one that Jeff Hostetler accidentally got.
Well, I forgot he was. My gosh!
I would give not my whole kidney, but a piece of my kidney for a dynamic quarterback for the New York Giants franchise, because I don't know if that team would be able to handle it. I don't know if the franchise would be able to handle it. They took Daniel Jones because Daniel Jones looks like a guy who was a quarterback for the New York Giants. Y.A. Tittle and Charlie Connerly were more exciting and dynamic quarterbacks than Eli Manning, and that's not a knock on Eli Manning.
No, not a knock, but it's so true. But I think that Daniel Jones is really a clone. I think they cloned Eli Manning.
I can see that.
When the night they I tweeted out the night they drafted. I tweeted out Daniel Jones on draft night, Eli Manning, and I did a collage side by side, and I swear to you, it looked like
they look like the same person. They look like they came from the same assembly plant. I'm gonna start asking the Manning family a couple questions because he's got the fakest name in football, Daniel Jones. Come on, it's not a real name.
Names. He's like Johnny Mnemonic.
Like Clinton Dix. Like, that's a football name. Daniel Jones. That just sounds like the fake name you get on one of those credit card mailers you get. Daniel Jones. This card can be yours.
Remember since 2003.
Yeah.
And I know we're going away from the social media aspect of how things work in the locker room, but but this thing where you just brought up the idea of how we pick who we pick for our team, right? And okay, so Daniel Jones, I'm gonna say the phrase, listeners, please forgive this, fits the mold of the current New York Giants quarterback, because he looks like he's molded from the same thing. And I'm sure that you guys would gladly take 2 Super Bowls with him, because the Jets just signed as their backup Joe Flacco, which
Super Bowl champion.
Yeah. Okay. So
you can't say that he didn't win one.
No,
he did have a good game.
Yeah.
On the back of Ed Reed and Ray Rice, and
So I'd heard about it earlier, and I was kind of feeling some kind of way, and I started tweeting out, and I even I joined in the Twitter fray.
Oh, Marvin, no.
And I tweeted out my plans, and it was Joe Namath running into the locker room after Super Bowl III with his finger up. And I put 2020, and it was Joe Flacco. 2 different Joes, 2 different reactions, 2 different thoughts. I'm like, and I'm just going to say it, because I got to say it. The idea of this cat in an offense, which he isn't, well, I'm assuming that the Jets will have an offense, so I guess I have to start there, because my team isn't exactly great on that. But a guy who's in an offensive system of which he's not familiar, and a mentoring role of which he is, but everything that's come out of his mouth have shown me that he's definitely not suited for that. And a guy who is, for all intent and purposes, and I get it, he's looking for a starting job, whatever, whatever, and maybe he might come in and not be Aaron Rodgers Jr. and actually try to mentor Sam Donald and to help him on the other things and being a quarterback in the NFL that he needs to get. But my goodness, mercy. Like, of all the cats to get, I mean, at least it wasn't Cam Newton. Okay.
Yeah, because Cam Newton would have gotten the starting job already.
Yeah, so yeah. But Matthew texts me, "Oh, Jet signed Joe Flacco," and my one-word answer he had to blot out for public use because it was everything but the vowel. Because I was feeling like, oh no, really, please be a bad dream not coming true. But again, organizational choices, what we do, who we pick, how we pick them, how the NFL is structured, right? It's about money.
Mm-hmm.
So Major League Baseball trying to live like they lived in the 1800s, but trying to live in a 2000 plus society, and obviously those things aren't working because what happens? You get players who are signing $300 million contracts, and they're crippling the franchise to sign anybody else. Because no, there might not be a salary cap, but man, there's only so much money to go around. The NFL, where you have a salary cap, but then if you might have a team where like two players might take up 60% of the salary cap. So now you're getting all these other guys. So now are you going to have a good team? Chances are it's going to be pretty challenging. It's going to be pretty tight. The NFL, NBA, where you see salaries are kind of slotted, time in the league, et cetera. But, and we allow you to have one max contract or two max contracts, but the rest have to divvy up so you can have some semblance of a team together to play, because otherwise we won't have any more Super 3s or Super 4s anymore. So
what would it be, just because we know in terms of position in the NFL, like there's this inherent hierarchy in terms of cost and in terms of salary. If there was established caps per position, how quickly would the union try to shoot that down?
Before the ink dried.
Yeah. But to me, and this comes from us.
I'm sorry. They shoot the printer as the paper was coming out. They just unload with like the M4. Okay, nope, contract didn't work.
But there's never going to be a perfect system because we are a culture that is capitalistic. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that's a good thing. That is the culture we are growing. And if you are a union worth anything, and you are trying to ensure that your members are making the most money possible, you are going to try to limit any chance of them holding that back.
Right. Because that's your job. Your job is to get your people paid. Again, and I will say this. We never make it about the money here. We never have in our 11 years of working together. We've never made it about the money, ever. And that's one thing I like about how we talk about what we talk about. But it becomes a matter of function, right? So you and I will never understand how billionaires think, because we will never have $1 billion and nothing else to do but to tell people what to do. We'll never have that. I mean, I know never say never, think positively, blah, 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 whatever. But and I've told Matthew this off camera, I've told it off camera, off air, whatever, and I've said it on air. The biggest compliment I feel I've ever been told by a non-family member was on years where I made quite a bit of money versus years where I made negative money, I was still the same person. And that touches my heart to be like, because that's what I want to be. I want to be the same whether I have $5 in my pocket or whether I owe the world $100. I still want to be the same person. Mm-hmm. So that being said, even if I had $1 billion, I would still live in a small house, still play golf. I'll play more golf. That's probably the only difference. The only difference is going to be.
I'd
I'm not.
finally play golf.
There you go. So, this reality, right, about what does a billionaire want? More billions. Okay, I get that. And also the prestige of being an NFL owner and all the trappings that come with it, things that you and I will never see, things that you and I will never understand, because despite of how much we see into the player's life with social media now, we don't really see into the owner's life and the owner's lifestyle like that, right? Why? Because the owners are still there. The owners are there no matter what, where the players will come in, they flash really bright. Here we go. Here's my Twitter feed. Here's my Instagram handle. Here's my this. Here's my that. Here's my whatever. And then they go away. So with the owners, they're always there, and they live in a different sort of, I'm used the P word, not like that, but a political world per se, than what the players live at, right? So with an owner wanting to make more money, I have no problem with that. With the players wanting to make more money, I have no problem with that. With the owner saying, if without me, you wouldn't have a league for you to play in, Matthew, or with the owner, or with you, Matthew, the player saying, well, dude, without you, you wouldn't have a team to put on the field because I'm me and you're not. And we can flip those chainsaws all we want to. However, at a certain point, and you know what? Maybe this is like the heel turn, right? Maybe this is like a wrestling thing. These are the dynamics by which we'll live, because people are going to talk about us like you and I are doing. Other people are, and we're going to talk about this all the time, because that's what we do. When behind the scenes, they're scripting it out. Okay, here's how we're going to do this week, because why? People are talking about us. And we talked about this in the last episode. Leagues are now 24/7, 365. There is no off button. There is no off season. There is no, even in this global off season, it still is an off season for these leagues. Why? They're still talking about it. Even if the conversation was only about how we're going to get back, there's still a conversation. There's still an idea. There's still word. There's still a presence outside of the gates of the facility, so to speak, because of Twitter, because of Instagram, because of all those other things. So guess what? If we live 24/7, we can't be doing the right thing all the time. Who talks about the organization that does the right thing all the time? They talk about organizations where there is drama, because why? People like drama. Many people like drama. Otherwise, it's not interesting. Somebody talking trash, somebody talking this, somebody talking that, whatever. Now, guess what? I want to see that now. Like what happened with NASCAR with your boy giving the middle finger salute because he got spun out on the last lap. When those sorts of things go on, you tell them, Olive. When those sorts of things going on,
she is a big fan of telling the owners what for.
That's right. Look, man, she can be my player rep any day.
And I think she has been.
There you go. So, that reality of no matter what we do, as long as we're being talked about, as long as we're being spoken of, we are winning. I think that does them all sort of good, right?
I think that if we start viewing every professional sports team and even every college sports team as a political party, and we view them, because the way that news is being processed now is a complete port of how sports news has been delineated for the past 15 years. Right. Even prior to the advent of social media, the rise of ESPN as a 24-hour-a-day channel, the rise of, and then creating ESPN2 and ESPN News and all those other, and the rise of sports talk radio, what we do for no money. The idea of this constant conversation, this constant narrative that needs to be spun, a lot of that is taken from politics that was digested through sports. That's the current sports landscape. Right. And that's been mollified and codified in politics and in the news. So this snake eating itself is a huge part of it, and social media exacerbates it. Because if you look at how social media is covered on a CNN in comparison to ESPN, it's the same exact track. Right. It's covered with the same level of understanding. It's the same the same reverence. Took me a second to get there. NYU education, folks. Took me a while to get a polysyllabic word to say it matters. It matters the exact same way,
Right.
and it's delivered almost the exact same way. The same sound bites, the same ideation, the same delivery system. It's hand in hand. And if we start viewing NFL teams like political parties, and that's the kind of the ethos of the show, we look at things from a sociological standpoint, a socioeconomic standpoint, and also from the standpoint of two people who have watched sports all their lives from different sides of the ball field and are trying to make sense of it. When you look at it from that perspective and you look at sports and you say, okay, they have their philosophy, they have their economic strategy, they have their pravda, they have their entire tone, and they have their way of getting it out there. They have their own messaging. If you start looking at it from that way, you can take things a little more soberly and you can see how they're trying to play the system, how they're lagging behind the system, and how they're really kind of building their own internal infrastructure. And that's why Roger Goodell, to me, is the most important commissioner in sports since Pete Rozelle.
Yeah.
And I took us on a weird, long logic train to get there. But you get to that idea from the fact that and you can make the same argument for David Stern, because to me, they're 1A and 1B behind Rozelle.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones who had to take their leagues into the 21st century. They're the ones that had to deal with the modern socioeconomic implications of the internet, of 24-hour news channels. Baseball really never, with the exception of the 94 strike, never really had to take that on. They never really looked at it that way. And Bud Selig was always on the side of the owners because he was an owner. Right. David Stern and Roger Goodell were league lifers or association lifers who worked as lawyers in the office and understood the machinations and the ways these teams and these leagues coexisted, and were able to take the steps because they were lifers. And this goes back to the conversation we had earlier about Don Coryell, where lifers define the future of the industry. We will always have these outsiders. We will always have these outliers. But when you look at the people who cause massive and impactful change within anything, if it's politics, it's economy, or most importantly, sports, it's going to be the lifers because they've seen the evolution, they understand the history, and they understand how to implement these levels of changes. And they're the ones who are going to be able to stick and move and be the counterpuncher to the media, to the fans, to the players, and more importantly, the player associations, because they're going to be the ones who understand and can take a step back and give you the case logic and give you the case studies.
Okay, so who do you think, talking about the lifers, right? And as soon as you said that, what popped in my head, I just wanted to be sure that I wasn't bananas, was Ozzie Newsome. Here it is. Ozzie Newsome is spoken of with reverence with how he handles the Ravens draft when he was GM, and now he's moved up to president of operations, or so, yeah. So he's spoken of with reverence, right? Rightfully so. Rightfully so. Oh, by the way, I just fixed my earbuds because I realized that I only heard you on one side because I didn't stick the doggone pin in all the way. So now I'm actually hearing us in stereo, which is nice. So so here we go. So someone like Ozzie Newsome, who's spoken of with reverence, who's spoken of and being sort of a hallowed person in the annals of the NFL. Have you ever heard him described as a black GM or minority GM?
Just Ozzie Newsome.
It's just Ozzie Newsome, right? So, when you talk about lifers, we associate them with the sport, period. And
who's another example of that? Romeo Crennel.
Boom. Great example. Great. Archie Ellis, who came to my mind. I think of Ted Kill, who was the lawyer who was sort of the mediator for the very first collective bargaining agreement for the NFL. And he talked about how whenever he had to speak with the players, he had Otis Sistrunk on one side, Art Shell.
Oh no.
Who was the other cat who was 6'9", 6'10", played for the Raiders?
He
Gene
was
Upshaw.
Gene Upshaw. Yep, Gene Upshaw. He was the head of the PA. He was a former president of the Players Association.
So, I will promise I will find this, but one of the things, working with Ted Kill on entirely another project, he let me get a copy of the picture of him being squished in between Gene Upshaw, and it was just, and in classic Ted Kill fashion, I'm pretty sure I wasn't there because I intimidated them. But it's just, but again, lifers in a sport that, oh, by the way, you know, sports is an escape, it's a way to get away, but it's also some people's lives, not just livelihoods, but they've dedicated their life to it. And so, you know, a kid says he wants to be a wide receiver for a Super Bowl winning team. We go, oh, that's cool, good to have a dream. A kid say he wants to be an accountant. We say, oh, that's nice. But yet and still, though, when you talk about the idea of the kid that wants to become an accountant who takes all the math classes and does what they're supposed to do and gets a degree and becomes a CPA, yay, you. But the guy who might have had 1 or 2 years in the NFL is like, wow, you really did something because you're in that half a 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 half of a 0.1 percentile of people in the world, because not everybody can do it, right? So, but pretty much anybody, if you pass the right classes, you can become an accountant, a lawyer, or, a professor. So,
You've been at least 4 of those things.
go. So, but the idea of, and you said it beautifully, the idea of how Roger Goodell has managed to allow the modern culture marriage to the NFL, another league that's not young, to help it stay alive, right? So every now and then you'll get a cat like Antonio Brown who comes in who's just a train wreck that's on fire inside a garbage fire, inside an electrical fire, inside a paper house, right? You get that guy every now and then. But guess what happens? People still talk about the league because of that guy. They don't lose because
and you're able
guess
to
what? We
curate
can
the
just
narrative.
not sign. Exactly. And guess what? We just cannot sign him.
Yeah.
The league can say, yeah, we don't want that guy on the team. So guess what? He still becomes a story. He still supports the league being a story, and he's not being dealt with by the league on a team because of he wants to wear his helmet from 1847, the leather helmet with no face mask, because that's what feels better on his head, and that's why he's been sick. Whatever is. Anyway.
And speaking of Antonio Brown, let's move to the list. You said you had someone.
Okay.
That is coming off of the list, or you wanted to make the argument for him. I want to hear.
I'm going to present the case of someone who can potentially come off the list. And for those of you who may not be familiar with it, the list is when you get on our list in this show, we don't say your name because you've done something so egregious to the sport, to society, to little kids or whatever, that we won't say your name anymore. But there's one particular athlete, and as soon as I say the name, I want you to take a look at Matthew's face, because it's going to be the last person he's going to expect for me to say right now. Terrell Owens. Duh.
For the longest time on our show on WKRB, it was T.O. is T.O. because T.O. is T.O. That was the end of our promo that you would hear on the radio station that 5 people would hear. And now you need to, does it have to do with the Hall of Fame?
No.
Okay.
With Hall of Fame. It has to do with something he did actually years ago that is now has kind of come back in my mind's eye. Okay, so Terrell Owens, American football player, do your Google the machine search for him or whatever. And he brought drama everywhere he was, and everything was always about everything about him. Everything, I love me some me. That's Terrell Owens. He just made everything about himself. no matter what. Even when he was trying to give you a compliment, he would still make it about himself. And in a lot of ways, he embodied the lack of class for, to me, not only an NFL player, but specifically a wide receiver who needed anybody who can show a lack of understanding as a wide receiver, those linemen have to block. Certain things have to happen for you to be delivered the ball a certain way. And the fact that it was always about you, it was just something that it just completely offended me. And I'm just going to say it that way, completely. And there's also a very personal reason too, which we won't say on the air. But what he did when Ocho Cinco had his show and he was trying to get a girlfriend, it was kind of like the match show with him. I forgot what they called it. Chad Johnson, Looking for Love. I don't know, whatever name. Just Google that because that's what it is. He was a guest. He was Chad's guest on that show. And there are people out there, I'm going to say people, I won't say women, I'll just say people, who go after professional athletes because of the money and other things too, I'm sure. And for a professional athlete to put himself out there to say, looking for somebody, you can imagine the kind of people that will show up to be his or her significant other because they want access to that cash, that power, that proximity, whatever, all the position, all the stuff that comes with it, right?
A quick fact check. The show was called Ocho Cinco, The Ultimate Catch. It aired for one season in 10 years ago, 10-year anniversary coming up. It was on VH1.
It's too long. It was 19 seasons too long. That one season was 19 seasons too long. So here it is. Terrell Owens is a guest on that show, and I'll tell you why I'm bringing this back to my mind now. And at one point, there was a young lady on the show who was actually a Kingsborough student, as a matter of fact, I believe.
Oh, good, fun,
because,
fantastic.
I was professor at Kingsborough University. Matthew was a student there, and we had for a while a lot of the reality shows like New York, I Love New York, and things like that. They were getting students from our student body population to become people actually on these reality shows.
That tracks. Yeah. That definitely tracks.
So she, I guess, had in her mind, well, if I won't get Ocho Cinco, I can maybe get my hands on Terrell Owens. So Terrell takes her outside. They're talking about whatever, and then she starts putting the moves on Terrell Owens, basically saying, guess what? If Team Ocho Cinco won't pick me, I'm surely open to be on Team Terrell Owens, right? Terrell Owens pulls him aside when they're talking about whatever, and Ocho Cinco brings up her name, and he says, I'm really thinking about her for the next blah, blah, whatever. And he says, no, man, don't do it. So why? Because guess what? She was coming on to me. And if I would have pressed it, I'm sure I could have, been successful. And he actually outed her for her behavior because he didn't want to see, as he put it, I just want to see you get into something with somebody who she just has interest in you, not as you, but you as a football player or whatever. She'll just pick whoever she wants to pick. And I'm going to tell you why that came to my mind and why I'm presenting that as my only piece of evidence to get him off the list. In spite of all this other stuff he's said and done, despite everything else. There is a person who a lot of professional athletes on every level in many sports have had a run-in in, and I'm not saying she's definitely on the list, where she goes out and hunts for these stars, and you will know her as soon as I say this situation. She's the one who had the baby with Dirk Nowitzki.
Oh yeah, I forget her name, but I know exactly who you're talking about.
So we're not going to say her name. You guys can look her up. But the reason that came to my mind was I saw an article about her. I think she's getting out of prison, or she's just getting out, or something is going on with her. And the reason that I remembered what brought to my mind was, not only have I seen her in action firsthand, unfortunately, thank God I was not involved, so safe. Not it. But a professional athlete who I have a lot of respect for as a person came out right away when it became public of the things that she did to Dirk Nowitzki right as she was getting ready to serve her prison time. basically he said, I wish I would have known that that's who he was talking about, because apparently they had the same shoe sponsor. There had been a bunch of shows together, so they talked about their relationships and things like that, or Dirk talked about her, I should say. And it wasn't the same name that Tony Banks knew her under when she was trying to get with him, so much so that he got a restraining order brought
Oh,
against her.
good.
And
Great, fantastic.
he wasn't the only athlete. There's a whole lot of other athletes who had dealings with her who said, enough already. Basta, enough, stop it. You know, so that I thought about this person getting out of prison, and I thought about she will find her way into the lives of some of these unsuspecting kids, given the fact that a player from Georgia is now bringing up charges on robbery, because of the lifestyle he wants to live.
Two NFL athletes
Exactly.
held up a card game.
One went to the University of Georgia. Sad to say. Yes, he's one of mine. But the idea of players who want to live in that lifestyle will always fall victim to people like that. And I mean, male or female players who want to live in that lifestyle will always fall victim to people like that, because that's who they target. The person wants to live that lifestyle, who wants to have a partner who looks a certain way, who acts a certain way, and all those other trappings that come with it. But man, the price you pay for that down the road is huge. The good thing, Dirk Nowitzki had a great team around him. And I mean of people, lawyers, family, friends. You know, he was able to get custody of the kid. He still did the right thing by her, the whole nine. But was also able to protect his assets to a certain degree, right? But how many cats are not that lucky? And so I'm saying that to say, bring it back to what we talked about with Terrell Owens, how in a situation when he's there with his friend, Ocho Cinco, Chad Johnson, and, you know, when he saw his buddy Chad was really interested in her, he pulled his buddy's coattail and said, nah, man, no, because here's what she's really like. So that move from 10 years ago is why I'm now proposing to our listeners, our people, is that enough for redemption to get him off the list, despite all the other stuff that he did and has done? Is that enough to be his Darth Vader moment?
Yeah, it's up there for me. It's up there for me. We'll put a poll up on the One More Word Facebook page this week. We'll put it up. The new episodes come out every single Monday across all 9,000 podcast platforms where we're on, including now our video form here on YouTube. This has been the first 90-minute session we've done straight on through, and this has been awesome. Any closing thoughts, Marvin?
Absolutely. First of all, thank everybody for taking time out of your life, because that's the one thing time is one thing you can never get back. Thank you for taking time to listen to us, for letting us talk. Shoot us some ideas. Give us something else to talk about. Give us something else. If you want to hear more about stats and stuff like that, we can do that for you too, even though that's not what we're about.
We can try. I'll cry during it, but I'll do it.
We'll swallow the pill for you, because we love you guys so much and we thank you for your support. Wherever you are, be safe. Wherever you are, make sure that you take care of your people. Again, thank you, Matthew, for all of your hard work, for getting this out there and, supporting us, having this fun. And just remember, as you listen to One More Word Pod, the one piece of advice that we always give you is stay safe and never let Jason Bourne borrow your car. Thank you. Have a great day, a great afternoon, great evening, great night, whenever you listen to us, and we'll talk to you again soon.